This is my slideshow presentation on my project called Finding the Medium That Doesn't Suck. It's a study on succulents growing in different mediums underneath artificial light. I hope this is good enough as a video where there's audio and visual things to listen to and look at. The first slide here just shows kind of how I started setting up the project. You can see at the top left, I have the light. After I got it from Amazon, I had tested it on some of my plants. There's 3 different light settings available. It's on the purple one right now. You can also switch it to just blue or just red. It's dimmable, and you can set it on a timer, which allowed me to keep the light going to the succulents consistent. I did use it on the full brightness when I was putting it on my succulents, and they all seem to do pretty well. I like the product very well. I'm still using it for my plants even though the project has commenced. The bottom row of pictures shows the containers that I used as the quote tanks or whatever you'd like to call them. They were about 6 inches in length, 2 inches in width, and about 3 inches in height. After I had put about an inch of material in there for the succulents to grow into, there's probably 2, maybe 2.5 inches for them to shoot up, which is ample amount. The middle picture in the bottom column shows the spray bottle that I used to water the succulents. Using a spray bottle allows for even watering and not just a puddle of water to sit in there. And it also lets the leaves get pretty wet, but not like dripping wet, it's even administration of the water. In the top right picture, you can see that there's masking tape and a Sharpie, and in the bottom picture underneath that, you can see where I put the label so that the light wouldn't be affecting the plants, like it wouldn't block any of the light because it was going to be underneath where the medium was anyways. The X-Acto knife in the top right picture was just used to cut a little hole so that gas exchange could be done through the succulents of carbon dioxide and oxygen. There's plenty of flow. This slide just shows me washing the materials that I was going to use, especially the gravel. It's very important to wash because you can see there's a lot of sediment buildup in it, especially in this bottom column middle picture. The small gravel had a lot of sediment, so I was just using this plastic cup from Chinese food takeout or something and putting water in it and swirling it around with a butter knife until the water ran clear and all of the sediment was gone. If I had not done that, the sediment could have really messed up the root systems and prevented them from growing as well as they did. Yeah, so this is a very important thing to do, is to clean the medium that you're going to use, especially if there's a lot of sediment buildup like there would be on rocks. This slide just shows the plants that I chose to use. You can see this plant on the left. I believe it's called Eptiopetalum graptilum. Walmart does a very bad job at labeling the plants that they're selling, so I had to do a lot of research to figure that out. The way that I drew this conclusion was the purple color you can see at the end of the leaves, and when you're looking at it from the top down, there's kind of a rose shape that it follows, which is very identifiable features of this plant. Behind the plant that is in focus, you can see the leaves that I began plucking off of the plant. Yeah, so I'm probably just going to call that a graptopelium just to make that easier on myself. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I did a lot of research on it. Yeah. This plant on the right, I identified as a Bryophyllum fedshankoi, which is also known as a lavender scallop. It's a variation of the mother of millions or the mother of thousands plant, so it does propagate through the leaves. It's referenced as a lavender scallop because of the purple kind of coloring at the ends of the leaves, and then you can see the scallop type shape, especially when it forms those tiny bumps, which is where the new growth actually comes out of, is those scallop shapes. Yeah, so this is how I dried out the leaves. It's very important to let them kind of almost scab over, so to say, so that the leaves are less susceptible to rot. So I just left them there like that for, I think, 5 days to make sure that they were all completely, scabbed over so that they would not just be invaded by water and then left to rot. After I had done that, I put them in the tanks that I had set up while they were drying out. prior to a week after this, I did not include the no medium as a part of the study, which is why it's not here in these pictures. So there's only 7 mediums you can see. I included it after it started growing. I had just left all the extra leaves in there, and they were real close to where I had set up the experiment, so they were getting pretty much the same conditions, which is why I decided to just include them, because it was a very interesting thing to observe. So from left to right, you can see that I have regular potting soil, and then in the bottom column I have moss, large gravel, small gravel. Above the small gravel there's sand, vermiculite, and then there's cactus dirt. This is pictures of how I left the set up. You can see that I tried to arrange it so that each plant got equal light. There's a chair next to the setup that I have the light clipped onto. Underneath the part that you'd sit on, there's like a bar, and that is where the leaves that are in no medium were resting, so they were pretty much in the same conditions. I wanted to put them next to this window so that they could also receive natural light, because I did factor in spring break, knowing that I wasn't going to be there for a week to turn on and turn off the light so that the plants could be under artificial light. So I wanted them to be able to receive both the artificial and the natural light equally while they were here. I thought that was beneficial for them. This is just a video showing the plants for the first time. I'm just going to kind of scroll over each of them, and it really shows, this is one of the 2 check-ins that I did of the plants. It's the one I did before the final check-in, where I'm kind of just observing what I can see above the medium. I did not pull them out so that I could see the roots or anything, because I felt that that could be a little harmful to the plants. So it's actually really weird, because the leaves in the parent leaves in the medium, the tank that contained no medium, seemed to be pushing out a lot of leaves. Granted, a lot of them did die, but you know, they had really short roots and, like, in comparison, large leaves, which is pretty interesting to me. I hypothesize that this is probably because the roots don't like to be exposed to UV light, because that can cause them to burn. So they probably did not grow super long, so they could stay kind of underneath the shade that those smaller, lower to the ground leaves would provide. So you can kind of see in this slide, when I go over it again, that the succulents in the sand, give me a second, I'm just pulling it up on my essay. So you can see that each of them kind of already have they're pushing out leaves and they're pushing out roots, but they're not too developed yet. It is really weird, because I felt at this point that the leaves in the no medium were doing the best, and it was kind of disappointing because I really didn't do anything for that one. They didn't really have good root systems, like I said, so I did take that into consideration. They were a darker green color in the leaves, which is really interesting, because if you look at the mothers in the other tanks, or the lavender scallops, the leaves are kind of lighter in color. It could be due to the fact that, like, they are the leaves in the no medium are really striving for light and other things that they have available to them, that because they don't have the dirt, so they're going to really focus on pushing leaves out so that they can absorb the most light that they possibly can. Yeah, the vermiculite had really well developed plants. There was pretty extensive root systems that I could see from the top in comparison to the other ones. You can see there's a little bit on the moss that I just went over, but that kind of changed by the end of the experiment. Regular potting soil had plants that were pretty developed, but not as developed as the ones in cactus soil, which you could see I just went from cactus soil to regular potting soil. Really interesting. The small gravel, you can see that right there. There's kind of small leaves on each of the succulents, which is really interesting, because I didn't think that gravel would be good mediums to grow on at all, because they seem to offer less nutrients to the succulents, like a soil would. But the results of the soil in small gravel were pretty close to the results of the medium that had like sand. So they were growing pretty close in proximity to one another. You can see there's a lot of leaves on those ones in sand, and then when I pan over, there's a similar amount of leaves in that one. The moss was, well, I guess I'll talk about this large gravel for a second. You can see there's smaller leaves on each of them, and the mothers were kind of having a rough time pushing out new growth. I'm not sure what happened to the fourth lavender scallop in that one. I did have 4 in there. It could have just died and I could have taken it out so that it didn't mold and then spread to the other plants, which is probably what happened. And then I did not want to put a mother from the no medium in there because it had already started growing, and that would kind of throw off the results of the experiment. So I did have so many leaves so that there could be some that kind of wouldn't survive or whatever like that. So it's really okay. And then you're going to see that I'm going to get to the moss in a second. And these seem to be growing pretty well in the beginning. Like the moss stayed relatively green for this one. We did have some issues with like a little bit of mold growing, especially in the vermiculite as well, but I just sprayed a bit of hydrogen peroxide on that and it went away by the next time I checked it. It's a really easy fix, doesn't harm the plants at all. If anything, it brings oxygen to the roots, so it's pretty good. Yeah, but I handled that. On the sides of the tanks, in the kind of upper right hand corner, one of the mothers had shot down a root and it was just hanging into there to that moss. It seemed that the roots were they really liked to grow into a more like natural fluffy type of environment, because when I did go to pull these out at the end of the experiment, they were really holding on to that moss. They were really anchored in there. It was pretty crazy, but yeah. You can see that a lot of those in the vermiculite, the grapetopiums, they don't have a lot of leaves yet, which is really interesting. They didn't develop too well in the vermiculite, I'm not gonna lie. You'll see in the next couple of slides where their development goes, but yeah, vermiculite was what I had hypothesized to grow the succulents in the best, and it was kind of surprising to me to see that that smaller one didn't do too good in there. And I'll go over why I think that is at the end. This next slide is just me going over what I can visually see atop of the soil for the last time. I do end up taking them out of the soil so that we can see the roots, but I really wanted to kind of examine it just based on the leaf growth at the top, because I think it does give 2 different perspectives. So it's good to analyze each separately and then combined as one. So you can see that there's a lot of growth in those succulents that are in the regular potting soil. They were a lot further than the growth that's in no medium. The no medium kind of, those succulents on the lavender scallops, the new growth stayed relatively close together. It did not stretch for the light very much. You can see that the roots are tiny. They did end up dropping off of the mother leaves pretty quick, but I think that's because the mother leaf was the only source of nutrients for a lot of these plants. So they really quickly dried out that leaf and then just left and tried to grow on their own. But there was not much to grow into, which is why the roots are so tiny. There was a high presence of leaf development, and none of the original leaves had dried up in I'm talking about the regular potting soil right now. So I think that this is because the potting soil does offer some kind of nutrients to the plants, so they weren't really trying to suck all that nutrient out of the parent leaf, because they did have the soil to go into. But you can see that when I pan over them, that they're kind of, the lavender scallops, and I guess the other ones, if you look at them close enough, like they're really stretching to the light, which is like the leaves are pretty far apart on the stem, and they weren't really doing this in many of the other mediums, like the one with no medium or the sand. They're doing this in the cactus soil too, and I think that this is because the medium that they're growing on top of, the soil, is not too reflective.